Well, good morning, everybody. This is Barry Jones with SP History. We're continuing our series on the formation of the deep state, and we began a story yesterday on the business called the business plot, the effort to overthrow FDR. And this was the first attempt that I'm aware of that the deep state decided that the chief executive, was a threat to their finances, a threat to their profits. And so they went about trying to remove him and replace him with a handpicked dictator, somebody that they could control and would do their bidding. And yesterday we learned that in the carrying out of this plot, they determined that they needed a face for the plot. They needed somebody whom the American people would trust, who had a war record, was a hero coming out of World War I, had all the medals, was known for his ethics and his morals, his good judgment, had a lot of street cred with the rank and file military veterans that were spread out all across the country. And so they picked Smedley Butler, and they approached him time after time. The first time they just asked him to run for commander of the American Legion. He didn't really know why. Second time, a month later, after he declined, they come back to him a month later, and this time they offer to pay for his campaign to run for commander of the American Legion. He declines again. Each time he gets a few more details about what the plot entails. And then in the third meeting, they actually offered him an $18,000 cash bribe. And this time he sort of decides, I'm going to find out what I can about this plot so I can expose it. So he meets with one of the financiers of this plot, a guy named Robert Clark, a guy who had a lot of business ties in China and worked for J.P. Morgan. Anyway, he knew him. He knew all these characters from his days in the Marine Corps. And so he meets with Robert Clark. Clark starts off by telling him, this is necessary because FDR is weak, he's old, he's sick, and it'd be a peaceful thing, but just we need you to basically give speech at this convention, American Legion. Of course, I'll have my guy write the speech for you, and we'll pay all your campaign expenses. You get that $18,000 cash bribe. Butler still refuses. He ups the ante. He says, "Well, we'll pay your house payment." He still won't do it. And so Clark gets frustrated. Says, "Well, then we'll just go to MacArthur, General MacArthur. He'll do it. You're too radical anyway." And Butler, the convention comes and goes without Butler. The convention, American Legion, ends up endorsing, or actually crafting a endorsement that uh, calls for the re the to to the reconstitution of the gold standard, which was their whole point. They wanted that gold standard. When FDR had abolished the gold standard, these guys with the money, the rules had been rigged in their favor. The gold standard uh, had constricted the money supply to such a degree that uh, inflation was killing farmers, killing small businesses, killing the little guy, but it was helping the guys with all the money. And when he got rid of the gold standard, all of a sudden the money flow was unrestricted. He could spend what he wanted on the New Deal. It was helping the little guy, it was helping the farmer. And it was coming at the expense of these rich guys, these owners, these deep state people. So they wanted that gold standard back. In fact, I think it was either McGuire or Clark who told him in the course of one of those meetings, "We want the gold." Pretty obvious what they're after. Anyway, when the American Legion came out and endorsed the gold standard, they thought, well, we might have got what we wanted without Smedley Butler after all. Problem was, without Butler to put that pressure on his friend FDR, it was just the American Legion taking a position. So FDR did not change his position. The gold standard remained. And so they're going to have to come back a fifth time and meet with Smedley Butler. Because, see, he's got that inside track with not only is he a war hero, not only does he have all the things that we talked about, the medals, the street cred with these war veterans. He also has that relationship, that personal relationship with FDR. So they come back to him a fifth time. McGuire again, he says, all right, we're up in the ante. And so I'm sure Butler expected, well, what are you going to pay for now? What are you going to offer to give me now? But instead, they said, here's what we're doing. We're going to overthrow FDR. You know, he didn't do what we wanted. You know, we got the American Legion to endorse the gold standard. He still didn't change his mind. So we're going to overthrow him and we're going to replace him with our own guy. And he can stay as president's figure, you know, kind of a symbolic ceremonial position. He'll be on all the papers waving his hand, kind of like the King of England. But he'll have no power. Our guy will have all the power. First thing he's going to do is reinstitute that gold standard. And we need you to form an army out of all these veterans out there who love you and who respect you, and march on Washington and overthrow the government. And this is when it becomes treason. And Butler's just horrified, can't believe what he's hearing. And they said, don't worry, FDR will be taken care of. It'll be peaceful. We're not going to harm as long as he agrees to it. If he doesn't agree to it, we're going to force him out. But we're not going to kill him. We're not talking about assassination. We just want him gone. And that's where we left off. And Butler's trying to figure out I don't have tangible hard evidence, physical evidence. How do I go to the powers that be and tell them what's going on without any evidence? All these folks are going to deny it, and I'm going to look like an idiot. How do I stop this without any evidence? How do I report this or go public with this or go to the authorities with this or tell FDR about this? I don't have anything in hand that will prove what I know. So when we left off yesterday, he was asking for an extension on the time that they were giving him to make this decision so he could figure out a way to expose this plot. So this picture here is of Paul French. He wrote for the Philadelphia Record. He's a reporter. So Butler decides my best recourse is to go to a reporter whom I could trust and who maybe can corroborate my story. In other words, bring him into the loop and let him meet with all these same people as if he is sympathetic to their cause, just like I'm pretending to be. And if they tell him all the same things they told me, at least now it's not just me. So French begins investigating the story, and Butler introduces French to all the conspirators. And he just says, this is somebody who's sympathetic to your cause, and I would want to bring him in with me if I'm going to participate in this or I'm going to be part of it. So in due time, obviously French played the part well, and he earned the trust of these conspirators, and they revealed to him, to French, all the same details that they had previously revealed to Butler. So now at least Butler has somebody who can corroborate his story. So then he goes to J. Edgar Hoover next. All right, this is the man, this is, head of the FBI. This is who you go to. We didn't have an FBI at this time. It was called the Federal Division of Intelligence, later becomes the FBI, but it was the equivalent at that time. So Hoover tells Butler, after he hears the details of the plot, says, well, so far no crime has been committed. It's just talk. And there's nothing really for me to investigate until something happens, at which point I can start investigating. So that really didn't go anywhere. But it did at least bring to the attention of the House of Representatives what it was happening. Butler and Paul French going to J. Edgar Hoover, word leaked to the House. The House began investigating it. They had a committee already established called the Special Committee on Un-American Activities. This is an outgrowth of the Red Scare. And they came to New York City to meet secretly with both French and also Smedley Butler. Representative John McCormick, Democrat out of Massachusetts, and Representative Samuel Dickstein, Democrat representative on New York, were in charge of the hearings. Two of them are pictured in this photo here. And they came to New York City secretly, of course, and they interviewed Smedley Butler and Paul French, who both gave testimony under oath. And they even brought before the committee some of the conspirators that Paul French had named, that Smedley Butler had named, and brought them in individually. And they began trying to piece together the story. So what's happening is Butler was smart in playing it along a little bit and bringing in Paul French. That at least gives him a corroborating witness. Then they go to Hoover. Hoover passes word along up the chain to the House. The House begins investigating. They go to New York City. They hold these secret hearings. They interview French. They interview Smedley Butler, and they also begin interviewing some of the alleged conspirators. As far as Butler's testimony was concerned, it was a bombshell. Uh, Butler testified. He said, "This is what I told Clark when the one time I met with Clark, who was behind all this. He says, quote, I have one interest, and that is the maintenance of democracy. That is the only thing. I took an oath to sustain democracy, and that is what I'm going to do, nothing else. I'm not going to get these soldiers marching around stirred up over the gold standard." So remember, Clark was telling me, you need to go in front of this convention and give this big speech and rally the troops so they'll put pressure on FDR along with you to reinstitute the gold standard. He says, I'm not going to get these people stirred up, these soldiers who trust me. I'm not going to get them stirred up over the gold standard. And the thing I'm most concerned about is democracy. And of course, FDR is a democratically elected, a duly elected president. He's the product of democracy. And us trying to overthrow him would be counter democracy. It would be fascist, and it would be treasonous. I'm not going to do that. I'm not prepared to do that. And regarding the conspiracy to replace FDR with a dictator, Butler quoted Clark and McGuire and all the rest of the Grayson, the other guy, Grayson, I can't remember his last name. They told him, "Don't worry about it." He said they told him, "quote, you know the American people will swallow that." Remember, they had said, "We're going to tell the papers that FDR is sick. He's old. He's infirm. He needs help." And he says, "You know the American people will swallow that. We've got the newspapers." Remember the propaganda that got us into Spanish-American War, the Yellow Press? Remember the propaganda that got us into World War One? Again, through a slanted, stilted press, this time from Britain, but with our blessing. Same thing in World War II. We have the newspapers. That's what he said. We will start a campaign that the president's health is failing. Everybody can tell that by looking at him, and the dumb American people will fall for it in a second. So this tells you what these deep state elites, these power elites, think about the American people, how easy it is to manipulate them. This is back in the 30s. You think it's any less today? So anyway, this is pretty startling testimonies for Paul French. He corroborated Butler's testimony, stating, quote, during the course of our conversation, they, talking about the conspirators, continually discussed the need for a man on a white horse, as they called it, a dictator who would come galloping with a group of organized veterans to save capitalism. To save capitalism. It reminds me of two things. It reminds me of Ted Dealey. Ted Dealey gave a speech. Dealey, his daddy, I think his name was George Dealey, was the Dealey from that they named Dealey Plaza after down in Dallas. He owned the Dallas Morning News, and he eventually died and handed off the newspaper to his son Ted. Ted hated Kennedy, and it made no bones about it. And in one particular public appearance, gave a speech during which Kennedy was sitting right out there in the audience. So it was he's saying this to Kennedy's face, and he says regarding the Cold War, we don't need somebody like Kennedy. He's and I can't remember the exact words he used, but he compared him to Caroline riding around on her tricycle, and how soft he was on communism. And he said, well, we need a man on a horse. We need a man on a white horse to come in and be strong, project strength, to stand up to the Soviets. And he was saying publicly to Kennedy he was a wimp. And that quote here, these conspirators are saying the same thing about FDR. We need a man on a white horse. So, you know, you got two things at play here. You know, FDR had polio and oftentimes was in wheelchair or sitting down. And we need a man on a white horse, somebody who's powerful and strong, vibrant, right, healthy. And they're going to say the same thing years later about another sickly president, JFK. The other thing it reminds me of is here lately, all you hear during the last few years is saving democracy, saving democracy, saving democracy. And the very people that want to say they're saving democracy are violating democracy in order to save it, right? They don't allow for a, you know, there's the Democrat Party, they're the ones doing it. They won't even allow for a free, a legitimate primary for the American people to determine who their candidate's going to be. Go back to 16, they rigged it against Bernie to help Hillary. In 20, they rigged it against Bernie again to help Biden. And in 24, they rigged it and kicked Biden out and put Kamala in with like 100 days left of the campaign. That's not democracy. That's not a democratic process. And then throughout all that period of time, especially when we got into COVID in 20 and in 24, we're now learning the extent of censorship that was taking place against the American people, coming right out of the White House. The same party saying we're trying to save democracy. You know, one of the fundamental rights of our country is the right to speech, free speech, and they were censoring it. I could go on and on and on. Okay, so here's a group saying we're trying to save capitalism. No, they're not. They're trying to save their finances. They're trying to save their profits. They're trying to save their network, their nest eggs. They're trying to save their money. But they're just using these euphemisms to try to make it sound better. Anyway, according to Butler and French, uh, the testimony they gave the House committee was pretty damning. So when they brought in these conspirators and confronted them, of course they all denied everything. We don't know anything. Clark ran off to Europe, so he couldn't even be questioned. He just fled the scene. Which, if that's not sort of an admission of guilt, I don't know what it is. But so you know they don't have any tangible evidence. This actually didn't happen yet. You know, it's a plot. It was going to happen. And anyway, on November 21st, 1934, Paul French broke the story in the Philadelphia paper that he wrote for, and it also came out, it's published in the New York Post. Now, the rest of the press, stop me if you've heard this before, did not take up the story. They thought it was a joke, and they tried to downplay it. This didn't fit their narrative. Remember now what they said, we have the newspapers. So why would you expect these rest of these newspapers to go against their benefactors, these deep state guys who basically control them, promote them, finance them? So it was just the Philadelphia Record, the New York Post, so you know the press is doing its best to run cover for these conspirators in this plot. The New York Times, you know, the so-called paper of record, barely even covered it, but they covered extensively all the denials of everybody that was named by Butler and French. For example, Thomas Lamont, who was a partner, J.P. Morgan had several people involved in this plot, by the way, called Butler's story, quote, perfect moonshine. Grayson Murphy said the plot was an absolute lie. Here he's on the right, the fascist who got the medal from Benito Mussolini. Gerald McGuire told reporters he had only gone to see Butler all those times to sell him bonds, and that Butler's testimony was a publicity stunt. So they're all denying it. The New York Times, after investigating, said that they thought that the plot was a gigantic hoax. And this is why I started off when I told you I was going to tell you this story that nobody knows about. Because in those days, if the press decided it wasn't true and they weren't going to print it, it didn't get reported because you know they had a monopoly on the news. You know, that would be almost impossible today with the internet and all the different news sources and outlets out there. Somebody would cover it. But back then, you know, it was just the New York Post was two-bit newspaper at that time, and the Philadelphia paper didn't have a wide circulation. The papers that mattered, the news media that mattered, they wouldn't cover it. Time magazine, for example, called it a plot without plotters, did a big layout on it and just made fun, like the media does, diminished Smedley Butler, made him look like a crackpot. Same thing with Paul French, and just completely diminished their story. And this is why the history books don't contain the story. This is why the news media, you can't find anything written about it. You got to go to books. You got to find some authors who took up the cause and wrote about it. Anyway, on February 15th, 1935, the House submitted its final report. And it included a lot of documentation. They had bank records, they had letters, they had documents, and it all verified Butler's and French's version of Butler's story. It all verified, it was corroborating testimony. I just wanted to focus on some of the conclusions of the committee. Number one, the committee said, quote, it received evidence showing that certain persons had made an attempt to establish a fascist organization in this country. Number one. Number two, there's no question that these attempts were discussed, were planned, and might have been placed in execution when and if the financial backers deemed it expedient. In other words, if Butler would ever agree to do it. Number three, the committee was able to verify all the pertinent statements made by General Butler, including one of the principals, McGuire, going abroad to study the various forms of veteran organizations of fascist characters. Remember when McGuire said at the fifth meeting, we want you to recruit all these war veterans into an organization like the Cross of Fire that had led that insurrection in France. Well, McGuire knew about the Cross of Fire because he'd gone to Europe to study these fascist organizations that he was trying, and that's why he came back with that idea. He went to France, he went to Italy, and he studied fascism and how to lead a fascist revolution and overthrow the democratic government, replacement with a fascist government. He studied it in Europe, where fascism was rising as a movement. He went over there, studied it, came back, and then his very next meeting with Smedley Butler, he proposed that we do the same thing. And of course, he has proposed that Smedley Butler be the leader of it. And they were able to determine that he did indeed go to Europe. They had documents, they had proof, and he did go to these places, and he studied for the purposes of studying these fascist movements. So circumstantially, it proves what they're trying to accomplish. Why else would he go and study that? And then they concluded, quote, armed forces for the purposes of establishing a dictatorship through the instrumentality of the proletariat, working class, or a dictatorship predicated on racial and religious hatreds have no place in this country. It's really all the committee could do was issue a report and a conclusion and back up the story of Butler and French and hope the media would run with the story. Of course, the media just ignored it. And they were hoping to shame these people, make it so public that in and of itself, no crime had actually been committed as far as they could find any physical evidence of that. Treason was being discussed, it was being planned, it was being plotted, it was certainly what they wanted to do. It just didn't happen because Butler always stood in the way. Butler ends up being the guy who not only stands in the way of the plot, he's approached to lead it, but he stands in the way of it ever happening, and then he exposes it. So Butler's the hero here. But they're hoping that if they give enough light to this story, enough publicity to the story, that it will shame these deep staters back into their holes where they belong, right? But look what happens. Remember, I've talked a lot about ultra vires and how this is a perfect ultra vires plot. It's all about the profits that they're afraid that the New Deal is going to jeopardize. It's all about the profits the gold standard is threatening. So that they come up with this plot. They don't care about the public interest. The public interest in this case is the fact that the public voted for FDR. They're going to overthrow him. They don't care about the public interest. They care about the profits. And then on the back end, they give themselves immunity. And you say, well, how'd they accomplish that? Well, even the final report from Congress, from the House, though it confirmed the existence of the plot and confirmed the testimony of French and Smedley Butler, it deleted the identity of all the plotters and censored some of the testimony. You've heard the word redaction. You know what that means. And they just left out the names of the people. So the American people are left, well, who's this nameless, faceless blob out there that's trying to overthrow our government? This is a way to ensure immunity for the uh, perpetrators. No criminal charges were ever filed against the plotters. So there's no accountability legally. And the committee sent a copy of his report to President Roosevelt, who said he was, quote, interested in the report, but otherwise he did nothing about it. There's a lot of speculation why he did nothing about it. We'll get to that in just a second. So, as far as the president's concerned, who is the ultimate enforcement mechanism of the law, he did nothing. The names are redacted, no criminal charges. And then, as far as history is concerned, it's not in the history books. I told you I was a history major. I took a lot of history courses in high school because I went to a high school, had a lot of electives, and I was interested in history all the way back. And I never heard of the business plot. Went to college, majored in history, never heard of the business plot, never taught it. I went and got my master's and majored in history, never covered the business plot. It's just like skipped over. No one even discusses it. First time I heard about it actually was online when I heard somebody discussing it, not as the major topic of the conversation, but as an add-in or a throw-in. What's that about? I had to go start digging and finding the information on my own. So it's a footnote in American history. The press ignored it. There was really, aside from French, who wrote about it in the newspaper, there's only really one other media personality in real time who covered it. His name was John Spivak. In 1935, he wrote an article, and he published the testimony, and he named the names that had been deleted and their businesses. He named names. Problem was, well, we'll get to the problem in here. So he's the only guy. And you can see the title of his article there, Wall Street's Fascist Conspiracy by John Spivak. He wrote for a magazine called New Masses. He had so his article was picked up by that periodical as well. So there's one media guy who did the responsible thing. There was very little reaction overall from the press, from Congress, and because of the public didn't know what they didn't know, there was very little reaction from the public. The speculation about FDR's silence was because some of the people that were named turned out to be some of his own advisors, some of the biggest contributors to the Democrat Party. In other words, people within his orbit were involved in this. And to protect them, he remained silent and didn't address it. He knew, and they knew that he knew, but he kept quiet about it and played the good soldier kind of role. National security becomes the smokescreen behind which most of the details are hidden from the American public. You heard that before? It's always national security. We got to redact all the names. We got to redact the people, the businesses, etc. Most of the details, the incriminating ones, out of national security interests. And that became a way to cover up the whole story. Now, as far as Spivak was concerned, the way they diminished him was the fact that he was a communist and a self-acknowledged communist. And so, as far as the press were concerned, they're not going to print anything from a self-admitted communist. His credibility to them was nothing. And Congress, the same, the White House, the same, the American people. All you got to do in the Red Scare days is smear somebody with the taint of communism, and no one's going to pay any attention to them and what they have to say. So they, in essence, and remember now, ultra vires is about maximizing your profits, public interest be damned, and immunize yourself. And immunity comes in different forms. But if you look at how this was covered and how this was reported to the American people, and as far as the legal liability, there was no legal liability. And as far as the public was concerned, most people didn't know about it. The press covered it up because we have the newspapers, so the press is not going to cover it. Uh, the president did nothing about it because it turned out to be some of his friends. So they end up with total immunity. This whole thing. It's the perfect ultra virus plot. Maximize profits by restoring the gold standard. That was the plot. Public interest. We don't care about the New Deal. We don't care about democracy. That's not what's important here. What's important here is the profits. The fact that American people went to the polls and voted for him, that's democracy. And by overthrowing him, we're engaging in something that's very undemocratic. And it's fascist, is what it is. Uh, the public wants the New Deal. That's why they voted for him. We don't care about the public. We don't care about the public interest. We don't care about democracy. And then they got immunity. The names were redacted. FDR ignored the report. Press ignored the report. Accusers were smeared. Butler and French were called crackpots. Spivak was a communist. And that's how the deep state wins. And Napoleon said history is written by the winners. I think Churchill changed it a little bit. History is written by the victors. Same thing. And ultimately, the deep state succeeded in immunizing itself from any liability. Now, they didn't succeed in overthrowing FDR. They didn't succeed in restoring the gold standard. But they got away with the plot and went away and learned their lessons from this so that the next time they don't make the same mistakes. And I guess you could say the biggest mistake they made was going to Smedley Butler. It was the guy they deemed necessary to make all this work, but he turned out to be a real thorn in their side. He's the hero in this whole story. He's the reason FDR got a second term, much less a third to fourth. So uh, a lot of people, this comes back, I'm circling back around now to answering the question that I started with. Why did FDR, our most progressive president, why did he give these deep staters pretty much everything they wanted? Now, not here at home. Domestically, he was implementing the New Deal, which is why they're angry with it. But when World War II comes along, he gives them everything they want as far as foreign territory is concerned and preserving the empire. But he invites them. We're going to get into this in the next part of the series. He invites all of these deep staters into the government to help run the war effort. And when we were talking about World War I, when Woodrow Wilson invited some of these power elites into the government to help run the war effort, we focused mainly on three people. And there were quite a few companies we talked about that benefited financially as a result of the war. But then after the war, they've been invited in. They brought with them ultravires, and that was their first real chance to operate the levers of power, first real taste of it. And then after the war, they got three of their presidents elected. So Woodrow Wilson starts this ball rolling in this direction, but FDR puts it in overdrive. And the deep state becomes the deep state as we know it as a result of FDR. You'll see what I'm talking about. We get into the names and the companies and the money and the new business model, which is war, is extremely lucrative. It all happened in World War II and turns the United States government into a wholly owned subsidiary of this shadowy government behind the scenes. It's unaccountable. It's unelected. These operators who pull the strings and the government that we elect, they're just the faces. They're ceremonial in their positions and in their power. The people behind the scenes are the ones pulling all the strings. They have all the money. They have all the control. They have the power. They are the powers behind the throne. All that really came to be as far as its modern dispensation under FDR. So why did our most progressive president give the keys of Washington over to the deep state? Why on earth did he do it or allow for it to happen on his watch? And there's speculation that this is why it's important to cover events like this, because you take this out and you don't understand why this happened under our most progressive president. But this helps explain it. it impacted him. It changed him, especially when he saw the names and he realized I'm not I'm not free to do what I want. I'm not as free to do what I want as I thought I was. There are people behind the scenes that are supposedly my friends. They're in my party. They're on my side that are plotting against me. And we found out about this one because of Smedley Butler, someone who was loyal. But how many times, how many others out there are plotting against me that there's not a Smedley Butler who will risk everything to expose these guys? And anyway, it impacted him where he uh, realized, just like Woodrow Wilson was informed of the facts of life and he became president. I know you campaigned against military interventionism, but you have an empire to protect. And as president, it's your job. If you don't do it, we'll impeach you. We'll get rid of you somehow. So the next thing you know, he's sending the military to Haiti and Mexico and World War One. I think FDR, as a result of this plot, and there were other factors, but this was one of them. Realized there's some certain facts of life that that constrain me. I'm not a king, and I have to go along. If I LBJ used to say, "Power is where power goes. Power is where power goes," and you can't do anything that you want to do if you don't get the position. You have to be president to act as president. So FDR is saying, if I'm going to remain president and help the people through the New Deal, or however which way, or guide us through this war, I got to stay president, which means I'm going to have to make some compromises. I'm going to have to give a little to keep these wolves at bay. I just think he really just it was a message, and I think the message was received. It's just like when JFK was executed in broad daylight, the way that he was in such horrific fashion. It was a message to future presidents: play ball or end up like this. They always go for a headshot, and and they took out JFK because he wasn't playing ball. You say, well, that was ancient history. How about 2024 when former President Trump was running for president? They took a headshot at him because he wouldn't play ball. Now they didn't succeed, but that didn't mean they didn't try. History's repeating. It's the same message by the same people. Um, so, like Wilson, FDR continued with his progressive agenda here domestically, and but then when World War II broke out, and the deep state made it known, these power elites made it known, hey, we have investments over in Germany we got to protect, and our ally is needing our help. FDR went along with a plan to stoke or prime the pump and stoke the passions of the American people, and laid Pearl Harbor out there like a juicy piece of bait so that the Japanese would fall for it, attack it, and give us free reign to jump into the war. And since they were all allies, we could pick our opponent, our first opponent. And of course, the first opponent we picked was Germany, to help England, our ally, but also to protect our assets and our business relationships over there, and the identity of these companies that have been doing business over there. I'm going to name some of those companies in the next couple episodes. So anyway, he gave these deep state operators what they wanted, and that was to protect the big business collaboration with Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, to make the United States the arsenal democracy, which is to make these companies here at home very wealthy, which it did, and to pick a Europe first strategy so that we could ensure that the interests that these companies had, these collaborators had over in Europe, would be protected. And for good measure, we sent over Alan Dulles to help with all that, to facilitate it. So that's the business plot. That the story a lot of us didn't know anything about, and but that is how history changes. Sometimes little plots like this, little stories like this that happen, the public's not aware of for decades later, helps explain the direction that leader took. Sometimes he even violates his own words, his own campaign promises, like Wilson, his own impulses, like FDR. He wrote books about these 50 or 60 men and how they were turning America into an oligarchy and they were despots. And then he turns the country over to them. And you're like, what? I guess in today's terms, I would question, you know, some of the motives that behind what Trump does are so easy, so transparent. It's not hard to figure out why he's doing what he's doing. But one of the things that confuses me is he picks RFK Jr. to run Health and Human Services and to go after uh, basically the whole health industry. And then on the other hand, just it was yesterday or day before, he held a press conference at the Oval Office with the head of Pfizer, and they just signed this big contract with Pfizer. It was like $70 billion for Pfizer to manufacture a certain uh, product, and basically going into business with the United States government. So on one hand, you hire the guy who's the most skeptical of vaccines, the most skeptical of all the pharmaceutical companies out there, and you turn him loose. And on the other hand, that's what the right hand's doing. On the left hand, he's making business deals with one of the biggest manufacturers of vaccines, which RFK says is causing a big cause of the health crisis in America, the chronic disease epidemic. So you scratch your head, you're like, what's going on? They got what the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. It seems to be working at cross purposes. So, you know, and maybe 20 years down the road or 40 years down the road or 50 years down the road, whatever, we're going to find out that there was something that Trump knew that the rest of us didn't know that caused him to do that. I don't know. That's my guess, but I'm just using that to illustrate that this is happening as we speak. The Woodrow Wilson example, the FDR example, are two most progressive presidents turning the country basically over to the deep state. That doesn't even make sense. It doesn't compute. It fundamentally violates everything they supposedly stand for. And yet they did it. It happened on their watch. Military interventions. Our two world wars happened under our two most progressive presidents. And the deep state got ensconced in the government, invited in by both of them. And now it's like, it's indistinguishable. The elected politicians from the deep state operator, you can't tell the difference. They're like all working for the same team. It's become this big uniparty. It's all of them against us. And when did all that happen? Woodrow Wilson and FDR. And as far as Wilson is concerned, the motive that I've concluded, and I don't have any proof of this, is that he got into office and was informed quickly that there was an empire to defend. And if he didn't defend it, they'd find somebody who would. And so he went about defending it. As far as FDR, at least we have this business plot to point to. So this might be part of the calculus. This might enter in and be part of the toxic brew that changed or altered the course of history, at least as far as he was concerned. Okay. Next part of this series, we're going to move into the war itself and the benefactors, the profiteers, merchants of death, all the companies, the individuals, first of all, that FDR invited in, what their backgrounds were, the companies and what they benefited financially. Not all, I'm just going to do a partial list. And then the companies that were involved in aiding and abetting the enemy during the course of the war. These are the same companies that were contracted by the U.S. government to outfit us to fight the war, and at the same time, they're doing business with the enemy, committing treason yet again. So the title of this channel is Treasonous Cabal. So you see what's happening. You have this cabal, this small group of movers and shakers, these deep state operators that are at every turn now committing treason. And it started off as treachery. But once the Spanish-American War, once that threshold of betraying the American people into a war had been crossed, now they're committing treason left and right. They can't help themselves. All right, that's it for today. Thank you for joining. Please subscribe to the channel. Please share it. Please like the channel, smash the like button, and please comment in the comment section. Thank you. Until next time, God bless.